Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Rain fell gently on the sidewalks of Harrington, a small American town where the peaceful facade concealed underlying tensions. The streetlights cast a yellow glow, flickering in the gusts of wind, and the streets were strangely quiet for a weeknight. Marcus Johnson, a black man in his 30s, walked calmly toward his car parked in front of the building where he had lived for 5 years. Dressed simply but elegantly, he wore a crisp white shirt and black trousers. His work bag rested on his shoulder, filled with files from his local consulting firm. Suddenly, a police car blocked his path. 2 officers got out, Officer Ryan Parker, tall, with a closed face and an authoritarian air, and Officer Derek Thompson, more stocky, with a suspicious and cold look. "Hey, you! Stop right there," ordered Parker, his hoarse voice echoing in the empty street. Marcus raised his hands, surprised but calm. "Good morning, officer. May I ask why?" he asked politely. Parker and Thompson exchanged a knowing glance. Their plan was clear: to intimidate, humiliate, and ridicule a black man under the guise of security. "We have a description that fits you. You're coming with us." Marcus felt a shiver of injustice but remained impassive. "I assure you, I did nothing wrong. I was simply going home." The police officers weren't listening to him. They handcuffed him, forcing him to lean against the car. Parker leaned close to his ear and whispered with a cruel smile. "You think you can walk our streets without consequences? We'll show you what it means to be a suspect in this city." Curious neighbors began to approach. Some took out their phones, filming the scene. Marcus, however, did not react. He felt the humiliation, but his dignity remained intact. His eyes, calm and unwavering, seemed to defy the injustice, and this serenity only further irritated the police officers. Within minutes, Marcus was taken to the station, while Parker and Thompson reveled in what they thought was their victory. But they knew nothing: what Marcus possessed, his influence in the community, and the moral force that would soon turn the tide against them. Behind the walls of the station, Parker and Thompson's fate was beginning to be written. And for Marcus, what had started as a humiliating arrest would become the catalyst for a legal and moral revenge that the city would long remember. The following morning, the pale sunlight filtered timidly through the large windows of Harrington Courthouse. The floorboards creaked under the hurried footsteps of the court staff, and the smell of coffee hung in the air. The room was almost empty, except for a few journalists, curious neighbors, and court personnel. Marcus Johnson entered, escorted by an officer, still calm, his back straight and his gaze fixed directly ahead. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, his gleaming shoes reflecting the antique chandeliers. He didn't speak, but everyone could sense his dignity, undiminished despite the previous day's humiliation. Judge Clarice Williams entered next. Tall and imposing, dressed in her traditional black robe, her hair neatly pulled back, she exuded a natural authority. Her gaze fell upon Marcus, and a faint, compassionate smile touched her lips. She was already familiar with Marcus's reputation in the city and had heard of his dubious arrest. Parker and Thompson settled themselves on the other side of the room, confident. Parker, looking smug, said to Thompson, "Look at this. He really thinks he can walk around this room like he owns the place. We're going to teach him his place." Thompson nodded with a smirk. "The judge isn't going to defend him. She'll let us do our job." Clarice banged her gavel, demanding silence. "The hearing is now open. Mr. Johnson, you are accused." Before she could even finish her sentence, Marcus raised his hand slightly. "Your Honor, if I may. I am here to understand why I was arrested last night, as no concrete charges have been brought against me. I am a law-abiding citizen and I simply demand that justice be served." A murmur rippled through the room. The police officers exchanged surprised glances. Marcus wasn't intimidated, and his calm, composed voice was disrupting their plan. Parker clenched his jaw and replied curtly, "We followed procedure, Your Honor." He matched the description of a suspect. Clarice Williams stared at him, implacable. And what description would that be? Exactly who were you tracking? Parker stammered, unable to answer clearly. The following minutes were tense. The judge asked question after question, revealing inconsistencies in their story, and Marcus, patient and respectful, kept reminding them of the importance of truth and respect for civil rights. By the end of the morning, the police officers had lost all authority. Their attempts to ridicule Marcus had not only failed but had backfired, in front of all the witnesses present. The courtroom, which was supposed to be the scene of Marcus's humiliation, had become the place where police arrogance clashed with dignity and justice. The morning wore on, and the courtroom was now filled with anxious murmurs and curious glances. Reporters, armed with notebooks and cameras, noted every word. Marcus remained seated, calm, his gaze fixed on Parker and Thompson, who were beginning to feel the situation slipping from their grasp. Clarice Williams stood slowly and stared at Parker. "Officer Parker, can you explain why you arrested Mr. Johnson last night, without concrete evidence and without a warrant?" Parker blushed slightly, clenching his fists. We were just following a lead, a vague description." Clarice raised an eyebrow, her tone turning icy. "A vague lead? You took it upon yourself to arrest a respected man in this city, handcuff him, and publicly humiliate him, based on a mere vague resemblance?" The murmurs in the room grew louder. Thompson tried to intervene. "Your Honor, we have acted." Clarice Williams interrupted him sharply. "You acted as if he were guilty before I even said a word in this room. And that, Mr. Thompson, is called abuse of power." Marcus rose slowly, his impeccable suit betraying no nervousness. He spoke calmly, but firmly. "Your Honor, I never sought to humiliate anyone. Last night, I was simply a law-abiding citizen. The actions of these officers not only offended me, but they also jeopardized our community's trust in the police." The police officers exchanged a worried glance. Marcus's calmness contrasted sharply with their nervousness. The judge, for her part, maintained her stern expression. "Mr. Parker, Mr. Thompson," Clarice continued, "I strongly advise you to reflect on your actions. This court will not tolerate discrimination or public humiliation. Your careers and reputations are now under control." Parker straightened up, but his arrogance had already cracked. Thompson, who used to think he was untouchable, paled slightly. The journalists, meanwhile, had begun to capture the scene with their cameras, immortalizing the complete reversal of fortune. Marcus sat back down, serene, while the courtroom, which was supposed to be the scene of his humiliation, had become the place where the police officers' arrogance turned against them. The community, represented by the witnesses present, now understood that justice and dignity could triumph over cruelty and abuse of power. As the judge prepared her decision on the next steps in the case, Parker and Thompson finally realized that their plan to humiliate Marcus had just turned into their own public humiliation. The courtroom was silent, breathless. Journalists held their cameras at the ready, anticipating every move. Marcus Johnson rose slowly, his hands clasped in front of him. His gaze, calm yet penetrating, swept the room. Clarice Williams gestured for him to speak. Marcus took a deep breath and began. "Your Honor, I have never sought conflict. I was born and raised here in this community. I run a thriving consulting business that employs several Harrington residents. I am involved in education and mentoring programs, and I fund local initiatives to help disadvantaged youth pursue their studies." A murmur rippled through the room. The journalists exchanged surprised glances, frantically scribbling in their notes. Parker and Thompson paled. Their plan to ridicule Marcus was crumbling as the truth emerged. Marcus continued. "Last night, I was simply returning home after a long day at work. Yet, I was arrested, humiliated, threatened, all without evidence, based on mere presumption. This type of behavior towards citizens, and particularly towards black men in this city, is unacceptable." Clarice Williams nodded slowly, impressed by Marcus's dignity and moral strength. She turned to Parker and Thompson, her voice becoming firmer. "You thought you could humiliate this man in front of me and the community. But now you are the ones under investigation. Your conduct will be examined with the utmost seriousness. Parker tried to reply, his voice betraying unusual nervousness. Your Honor, we followed our procedures. Clarice interrupted him, icily. Your procedures have humiliated an innocent citizen and jeopardized public trust in the police. This will not be tolerated. The neighbors in the room whispered amongst themselves, some applauding discreetly. Thompson clenched his fists, unable to look away. Marcus, on the other hand, remained calm, as if his mere presence was enough to expose the weakness and arrogance of the police officers. Before the hearing ended, Marcus made a final statement, addressed to everyone. I am not seeking revenge. I am simply seeking justice. And I believe that when we remain calm, respectful, and steadfast in our truth, justice always prevails in the end. Judge Clarice Williams banged her gavel and announced. The hearing is suspended until further notice. I want a full report on the arrest and conduct of these officers. This case will be closely monitored. As Marcus left the room, the police officers realized the situation had taken a dramatic turn. Their arrogance had turned into public shame, and karma was already beginning to take its toll. The entire city would soon know the truth about them, and Marcus, with his dignity intact, was preparing to see justice served. 2 days later, news of Marcus Johnson's unjust arrest and the confrontation in the courtroom had spread throughout Harrington. Local media had published articles, social media was ablaze, and the community was beginning to express its outrage. Parker and Thompson tried to maintain a facade of confidence, but the pressure was beginning to crush them. The police chief, worried about the extent of the controversy, summoned them to his office. Ryan, Derek, do you understand that this situation is out of control? Asked Chief Anderson, his face grim. Parker sighed, Chief, we were just doing our job. Anderson shook his head, your work has humiliated an innocent man and tarnished the image of our department. You are now in the crosshairs of the city and the court. You will have to respond seriously. Meanwhile, Marcus didn't remain idle. He gave interviews to journalists, sharing his side of the story with clarity and dignity. He participated in community programs, reiterating that his goal was not revenge but justice. The residents publicly supported him, and some even went to the police station to attest to his impeccable character. In the courtroom, Clarice Williams announced a new hearing to review the evidence and the conduct of the police officers. Parker and Thompson were summoned, feeling the weight of their actions beginning to crush them. During this hearing, Marcus made a strong statement, addressed directly to the police officers. You thought you could humiliate and frighten me. But fear has never guided my choices. What you did last night did not break me. It's time you understood the consequences of your actions. The police officers tried to respond, but their words seemed weak, almost ridiculous, compared to Marcus's serenity and self-assurance. Clarice Williams looked at them sternly. You thought you were humiliating a man. Now you are the ones under the scrutiny of the public and the justice system. The law will not tolerate abuse of power and discrimination. Take note, your career and your reputation are at stake. Outside, the residents waited at the courthouse doors, some applauding Marcus as he passed. What should have been a humiliation for him had transformed into a symbol of strength, justice, and resilience. Parker and Thompson understood, for the first time, that every action has its consequences, and that karma never waits long. The new hearing had been scheduled for Thursday morning. The courtroom was packed. Local and national journalists were present, cameras trained on every move. The residents of Harrington wanted to witness what was going to happen. Marcus entered, impeccably dressed as always, politely greeting the journalists and neighbors present. Parker and Thompson, on the other hand, seemed tense, their faces betraying a mixture of fear and irritation. Their initial plan to humiliate Marcus had completely backfired. Clarice Williams opened the hearing. Today, we will examine the conduct of Officers Parker and Thompson and the evidence of the wrongful arrest of Mr. Marcus Johnson. Marcus spoke. Your Honor, I am not seeking revenge, but the truth. Last night, I was arrested without cause, based on prejudice. What I want today is for justice to be served, not only for me, but for all those who might suffer similar abuse. Then, in a calm but firm voice, Marcus revealed a fact that no one had yet mentioned. I run several businesses in this city, employing dozens of people. I am involved in educational, mentoring, and youth support programs for disadvantaged youth. I actively participate in the life of our community. A murmur rippled through the room. The journalists exchanged stunned glances. Parker and Thompson went white instantly. Their arrogance had turned to shame, for they understood that they had tried to humiliate not only a respected citizen, but a pillar of the community. Clarice Williams struck her hammer. It is clear that the officers abused their power. Last night's actions cannot go unpunished. This court will take firm action. Marcus concluded calmly. Your Honor, my goal is not to harm the police. But I hope this incident will serve as a lesson. Dignity, truth, and justice always prevail over arrogance and discrimination. As Marcus left the courtroom, residents and journalists surrounded him. Spontaneous applause erupted. Parker and Thompson, meanwhile, left the court with their heads bowed, humiliated in front of everyone, aware that their plan to ridicule Marcus had backfired on them in the most public way possible. From that day on, Marcus's reputation was enhanced throughout the city. He was no longer simply a man unjustly accused, he had become a symbol of strength, dignity, and justice in the face of arrogance and abuse of power. A few days after Marcus's successes and integrity were publicly revealed, the Harrington police were forced to launch an internal investigation into Parker and Thompson. Documents and testimonies poured in. Neighbors, colleagues, and even some members of the public who had witnessed the arrest and hearings testified to the injustice and abusive behavior of the two officers. Parker and Thompson found themselves summoned to the station by Chief Anderson, who was waiting for them with a thick file and a stern look. Gentlemen, you are accused of abuse of power, racial discrimination, and attempting to humiliate an innocent citizen. Your actions will have professional and legal consequences. Parker, usually arrogant, stammered. Chief. I thought I was just doing my job. Anderson shook his head. Your work has destroyed public trust and tarnished your service. Your apologies are not enough. You are losing everything you thought you could control. Meanwhile, Marcus continued to appear in the local media, speaking about justice, civil rights, and accountability. His undiminished dignity contrasted sharply with the growing nervousness of the two police officers. The residents of Harrington saw him as a role model, a man capable of transforming a personal attack into a public lesson in courage and patience. One of the most humiliating moments for Parker and Thompson came when they had to appear before the police disciplinary board. Witnesses testified about exactly how they had arrested Marcus without cause. Neighbors' video recordings corroborated their lies. Marcus, invited to testify, calmly stood up and said, I never sought to humiliate anyone. I simply exercised my rights and respected the law. But your actions show that those who abuse their power must be held accountable. The police officers were powerless to reply. Every word Marcus spoke landed like a hammer blow, exposing their arrogance and guilt to everyone. The commission quickly concluded that severe sanctions were warranted: suspension, a lengthy disciplinary investigation, and strict supervision. As he left the courtroom, Parker whispered to Thompson, I never would have believed that this guy could put us in such a situation. Thompson, silent, knew that this was much more than a professional humiliation. Their credibility and reputation were now irreparably damaged. Outside, Marcus received applause and encouragement. The city was beginning to understand that in the face of injustice, patience, calm, and dignity could transform oppression into triumph. The day of the long-awaited trial arrived. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, residents of Harrington, and even citizens from neighboring towns wanted to witness this historic moment. Cameras were set up everywhere, ready to capture every detail. Marcus Johnson entered, impeccable as always. His navy suit contrasted with the autumnal gray filtering through the large windows. His stride was confident, his gaze direct, his presence imposing. Detectives Parker and Thompson, on the other hand, entered with a mixture of nervousness and embarrassment. Their former arrogance had completely vanished. Judge Clarice Williams opened the hearing. Today, we will examine the case of Marcus Johnson versus Officers Parker and Thompson. All the evidence regarding the wrongful arrest and abusive conduct of the police officers will be presented. Witnesses came forward. Neighbors recounted how they had seen Marcus arrested without cause, video recordings corroborated their accounts, and several community members testified to Marcus's positive impact on the city. Each testimony strengthened his credibility and exposed the police's shortcomings. When Parker tried to speak, he stammered, unable to defend his actions. We were following the procedures. Clarice Williams interrupted her sharply. Procedures do not give the right to humiliate, discriminate against, or violate the dignity of a citizen. Your apologies are not enough. Marcus stood up calmly and declared, "Your Honor, I am not seeking revenge, but justice. I hope this case will serve as a lesson. No abuse of power will go unpunished, and human dignity must always be respected." Tensions rose when evidence showed that Parker and Thompson had attempted to falsify reports to justify their arrest. The entire courtroom could sense the complete reversal of fortune. At the end of the day, Clarice Williams delivered her verdict. Officers Parker and Thompson are found guilty of abuse of power and racial discrimination. Severe disciplinary sanctions are imposed, and their conduct will be recorded in their permanent files. The room erupted in murmurs of approval and a few timid claps. The police officers, publicly humiliated, left the room with their heads bowed. Marcus, however, remained standing, serene, a discreet smile on his lips. Outside, the crowd cheered Marcus. What had begun as an attempt to humiliate him had turned into a resounding triumph. The once arrogant police officers had learned the hard way that justice always catches up with those who abuse their power. The weeks following the verdict were trying for Parker and Thompson. Their names were now publicly associated with abuse of power and discrimination. Social media, local newspapers, and even some national news channels picked up the story, condemning their arrogance and behavior. Parker, once proud and self-assured, received daily messages of indignation and reproach from colleagues and citizens. Thompson, meanwhile, had been relegated to administrative duties, cut off from all contact with the public. The trust and respect they had thought unshakable had vanished in a matter of weeks. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his commitment to the community. He participated in several local conferences on justice and civil rights, and his story became an example of resilience and dignity in the face of injustice. The residents of Harrington saw him not only as a man unjustly accused, but as a true moral leader. One day, during a public meeting held in the town hall, a young man approached Marcus. "Mr. Johnson, I wanted to thank you. Thanks to you, I know that staying calm and standing up for one's rights can make a difference." Marcus smiled gently. "Thank you. It is important to remember that justice depends not only on ourselves, but also on our ability to act with integrity and patience." For their part, Parker and Thompson tried in vain to restore their reputations. Disciplinary sanctions, internal investigations, and public disgrace made any attempt at a comeback impossible. Every action they took seemed to remind the community of their humiliation and moral failure. Outside, Marcus strolled through the streets of Harrington. Residents came to greet him, some shaking his hand, others simply thanking him with a smile or a nod. He had become a living symbol that justice and dignity could triumph, even in the face of the most blatant abuses. In this city, a lesson had been learned: arrogance and abuse of power may seem powerful in the short term, but they never withstand the force of truth and justice. A few weeks after Parker and Thompson's public conviction, the town of Harrington was still feeling the aftershocks of the case. The two police officers had tried to return to their routine, but everywhere they went, their reputation preceded them. Residents regarded them with suspicion, some avoiding them altogether. Marcus, for his part, continued to act with calm and integrity. He had established a mentorship program for the city's youth and was collaborating with the mayor's office to implement training programs on discrimination and police ethics. His goal was clear: to transform his own experience into a catalyst for change in the community. One morning, Parker and Thompson were summoned to an official meeting with Chief Anderson and the town committee. The tension was palpable. "Gentlemen, it has been decided that your return to the field will be suspended indefinitely. You will be reassigned to purely administrative tasks, without contact with the public," announced Anderson, cold and determined. Parker tried to protest, "But Chief, we always—" Anderson interrupted him, "Your actions have shattered the community's trust. You will never again be the respected officers you were supposed to be." Later that day, Marcus attended the town council meeting as a witness and community advisor. His calm demeanor and charisma commanded respect. He looked at Parker and Thompson and simply said, "Justice is not revenge. It is a lesson. And today, that lesson has been learned. Dignity and truth always triumph over arrogance and fear." The humiliated police officers could only silently acquiesce. The entire room recognized Marcus's moral strength. Even those who had previously doubted him understood that he embodied quiet strength and justice personified. Outside, residents cheered Marcus, some shaking his hand, others thanking him for defending not only his own rights, but those of the entire community. The police officers, however, knew they would be forever marked by this lesson. Every attempt to regain their authority would fail in the face of the collective memory of their humiliation. Karma, finally, had caught up with Parker and Thompson. Their arrogance and discrimination had been exposed, and Marcus, thanks to his calm, dignity, and commitment, had transformed the injustice suffered into a resounding moral triumph. Months passed, and the town of Harrington would never forget the story of Marcus Johnson. The inhabitants spoke of him with admiration, not only as the man unjustly accused, but as a symbol of resilience, dignity, and justice. Parker and Thompson were now relegated to administrative duties, completely cut off from the public eye. Their reputation was irreparably tarnished, and every attempt to return to the court was met with skepticism and silent derision. Karma had run its course, and their arrogance had been punished beyond repair. Marcus, for his part, continued to build his life and that of his community. He ran his businesses with integrity, funded educational programs, and actively participated in local social justice initiatives. Every action he took reminded the residents that courage and dignity always triumph over injustice and arrogance. One evening, while strolling through the illuminated streets of the city, Marcus stopped and watched the children playing in the park. Some parents approached to greet him, and a young boy said to him admiringly, "Mr. Johnson, thank you for showing that justice and dignity truly exist. You inspire us all." Marcus smiled and replied calmly, "Always remember that strength lies not in intimidation, but in patience, truth, and perseverance. Even in the face of injustice, there is always a path to justice." Throughout the city, Marcus's story became a life lesson. The inhabitants understood that no one, regardless of their position or power, could humiliate with impunity someone who had the moral strength and patience to defend their rights. And so, Marcus Johnson, who had been the victim of an attempt at humiliation and abuse of power, had transformed this experience into a moral and social triumph. Justice had prevailed, karma had struck the arrogant, and Harrington had learned that dignity and truth were more powerful weapons than fear and arrogance. The story ended with a symbol of victory, Marcus, standing in the middle of his community, a calm smile on his lips, embodying the quiet strength of justice and human dignity.